What's good? It's Wood. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. Before we close out 2020, the COVID pandemic year, I wanted to kind of shout out some of the fighters and fights and performances, trainers that I thought were worthy of best of 2020 recognition. Now, there was obviously limited activity due to COVID. There were a couple months where there was no action, and then action started to slowly come back in, first through Top Rank and Bob Arum having that early Shakur Stevenson fight. But little by little, some of the activity started to pick up. You got Jose Ramirez versus Victor Postal. Then you got, around the same time, you had Joe Smith Jr. versus Canelo Alvarez. And again, that was all on the Top Rank Bob Arum side, which is kind of interesting. Remember when Bob Arum and Dana White of the UFC were going back and forth when Bob Arum was calling Dana White reckless because of how bullish Dana White was on keeping the activity going, even in the beginning of the pandemic? Now on the Eddie Hearn Matchroom DAZN side of things, one of the first significant fights that they rolled out were Dylan White versus Alexander Povetkin. Al Heyman and PBC were able to have a couple pay-per-view events with fans in attendance. Gervonta Davis versus Leo Santa Cruz, Errol Spence versus Danny Garcia. So first of all, I want to shout out all of the people involved in keeping the train on the tracks throughout an otherwise extremely chaotic year, and those who were able to bring some of the exciting action that we were spoiled with in 2020. And I also and especially want to thank anybody who has clicked into any one of my videos this year or last year and gave a few minutes to some of my boxing or MMA commentary. Thank you tremendously for that. So, in this best of 2020, the different categories that I want to briefly go over are Fighter of the Year, Performance of the Year, Knockout of the Year, Fight of the Year, Biggest Game-Changing Event, and Trainer of the Year. And we'll kick this off with Trainer of the Year. Now, Derrick James runs away with this one, mainly because he's been working so closely with two of boxing's top 10 pound-for-pound fighters, at least in my book. That's Errol Spence Jr. and Jermell Charlo. What? Jermell Charlo, top 10 pound-for-pound? Yes. He's got 3 of the 4 belts at 154, and he's avenged his only loss by stopping Tony Harrison. He works through his flaws. He doesn't quit when he gets behind on the scorecards. Derrick James keeps him sharp, keeps him strategic, and keeps him in great enough shape to be able to rally late in his fights when he does fall back on the scorecards and needs a strong second half of the fight. And he's able to carry his power late into fights. Credit Derrick James for that as well. Jermell Charlo knocked out his quality challenger, Jason Rosario, earlier this year. And his stablemate, Errol Spence Jr., is currently my second best pound-for-pound fighter in the sport. He's number 5 according to Ring Magazine, which I think is a little bit ridiculous. I don't see how you could have Errol Spence at number 5. Are you kidding me? Nonetheless, Derrick James has got it going on with these two. Errol Spence Jr. is looking nearly unbeatable, and Jermell Charlo has nearly cleaned out the junior middleweight division. The only guys at the top that he hasn't fought are former champ Jarrett Hurd, former champ Julian J. Rock Williams, who his older brother Jermall Charlo had knocked out when he was at 154, and former champ Erislandy Lara. And then whoever comes out with the only belt that Jermell Charlo doesn't have between Teixeira and Castano. By the way, Errol Spence Jr. and PBC really do need to make this Terrence Crawford fight happen. It's pretty dire now. It'll really be awful if Terrence Crawford is like 35 years old or older by the time he finally fights Spence. Shoot, that's probably one of the reasons why PBC and Spence are talking that 60-40 or 70-30 per split crap. They sense that Bud Crawford is more desperate and urgent than they are. They could perhaps wait it out a bit. Crawford can't. But my trainer of the year is Derrick James. Now on to the biggest game-changing boxing event. Now this isn't going to be COVID, because COVID was obviously the biggest thing to happen to sports in general, to society at large. But I'm talking specifically like the biggest game-changing boxing fight. And that would undoubtedly be the total tide change at lightweight, with Teofimo Lopez dethroning the longtime pound-for-pound top 3, at least, Vasily Lomachenko, who was previously viewed as nearly untouchable, like a Jedi Knight or something. He'd been looking like an absolute magician since beating Gary Russell Jr. in only his third professional fight. Well, an extremely young and largely unproven Teofimo Lopez came in and put an end to all of that. Lopez was a big underdog, and many thought that he risked really hurting his career in biting off more than he could chew in fighting a guy as great as Lomachenko, who not only beats his opponents, but often defangs them, strips them of whatever superpowers they have, and has them looking bewildered and confused like they were surrounded by Lomachenko. Well, again, Teofimo was having none of it. He was coming off an electrifying knockout win over Richard Comey to claim his first title and had been earning a reputation as a flashy, fast, and powerful knockout artist. So even the people who thought that Teo might pull off a shocking upset thought that it would be via knockout, because there was just no way that he was going to outpoint a skilled boxing perfectionist like Lomachenko, who's one of the best round winners in the sport, meaning round by round, even minute by minute. Lomachenko was dominating nearly every moment of his fights. That's who Lomachenko is coming into this fight with the 23-year-old Teofimo Lopez. But Teofimo not only beat Lomachenko, but he beat him via decision by dominating the first half of the fight, where Lomachenko was getting backed up by Lopez's speed and power. Lomachenko couldn't find openings. For the first 6 rounds, Lomachenko, for once, looked like the confused one. It was shocking to see. Lopez was looking pretty big in there too, and you know that he's got that hair trigger quickness with his knockout left hook. And although Lomachenko did come on strong late, it wasn't enough to offset that early deficit. By the way, Lomachenko's recent excuses aren't a great look. We'll see how he recovers mentally, psychologically, from a loss to someone this young, this flashy, this brash. Teofimo Lopez is still on a big victory lap. Well deserved. Out of the young lightweights in the game, he took the biggest gamble and he won big. So to the victor go the spoils. The king is dead, long live the king. Teofimo Lopez is suddenly the man at lightweight. And him beating Lomachenko is definitely the biggest game changer in 2020. Now on to Fight of the Year. Now my Fight of the Year, it wasn't a title fight, but it was between 2 highly ranked fighters, Jose Zepeda and Ivan Baranchyk, who had experience fighting very competitively with the likes of Josh Taylor and Jose Ramirez, the division's current champions. Well, this fight featured knockdowns almost from the opening bell. 2 knockdowns in the first round, plus a missed knockdown in the first. It was ruled a slip. So Baranchyk, who's got some real pop in his punches, which you can see from the very first power punches of the fight. Check that out. How he throws that long, kind of long, but not a wide, a narrow, long left lead hook. It's a lead punch, but it's a power punch, and he caught him with it in the opening seconds of the fight. So he knocks Zepeda down twice in the first round. Then Zepeda knocks Baranchyk down in the second round, while Baranchyk also knocked him down in the second round. So it's 3 knockdowns to 2 by the end of the second round. Zepeda knocks Baranchyk down again in the third, and then again in the fourth, and then knocks him out cold in the fifth. But these several knockdowns only tell a part of the story here. The action and pace between the knockdowns, it was just as thrilling. The punches that landed, even the punches that missed, which there weren't that many, as Zepeda was quickly approached with a firefight and obliged. So this fight was all action, and Zepeda, who was uncharacteristically brawling against a bigger puncher, still had just enough nuance in his game to land the slightly better timed and better placed punches to eventually finish Baranchyk off. And this was the first time that Baranchyk has ever been stopped. I mean, his only loss prior to this was a decision loss versus Josh Taylor, who's currently a top 10 fighter in the entire sport on a lot of people's lists. So if Zepeda was going to win this one, it was almost certain that it was going to be via decision. No one was expecting what we got, especially not Tim Bradley, who was so appropriately a part of this broadcast here. It actually reminded me of some of the action that we got in Bradley's very dangerous fight versus a then unknown slugger, Ruslan Provodnikov. Check that one out if you want to see another brutal thriller. Bradley was getting his head flown, but managed to pull off the decision win. All guts in that one. And he was very sensitive to what he was seeing in the ring between Zepeda and Baranchyk. So that's my fight of the year. I was trying to consider, what is the fight? What is the one fight that someone has to see with their own two eyes to even believe? This is the one. Estrada versus Cuadras was also in the running. That was another fantastic back and forth fight. But Zepeda versus Baranchyk, that just takes the cake. That you just don't see that very often. So now we're moving to knockout of the year. And for me, this was between two. It was between Gervonta Davis and Leo Santa Cruz, and then Dillian Whyte versus Alexander Povetkin. And I'm going to go with Povetkin knocking out Dillian Whyte as being the knockout of the year. And this is because of how the fight was going before the knockout. Povetkin was losing that fight. In fact, he had been dropped a couple times. It looked like if anybody was going to earn that stoppage, it was going to be the higher ranked. So Whyte was ranked above Povetkin, and he was winning the fight. And he was like the younger fighter. Dillian Whyte's like 32. Povetkin's like 40, 41. Yes, he is a former gold medalist. Yes, he had only had 2 losses in his entire career, and they were both versus 2 of the best in the sport. He lost to a prime Vladimir Klitschko via decision, and then he lost in a stoppage, a TKO versus Anthony Joshua, in a fight that he was competing pretty well in. So Povetkin was no joke, but the idea was that this is just the right time in Dillian Whyte's career. This was some business that he had to handle to stay the mandatory, because he'd been the mandatory challenger for a while now. He had been waiting in the wings to get his title shot. So this was seen to be a dangerous fight, but Dillian Whyte was supposed to win it, whereas Gervonta Davis was a substantial favorite against Leo Santa Cruz. Leo Santa Cruz had only had 1 fight in that division. He was generally fighting a division below at featherweight. So a lot of people thought that, how is Leo Santa Cruz going to even survive 12 rounds with Gervonta Davis? Being that Santa Cruz is kind of a come forward and throw a lot of punches type of guy, people kind of thought that Davis had the upper hand in this one. And it just so happened that the fight ended up being a lot more competitive through the first half of the fight than most thought it was going to be. You know, Leo Santa Cruz was putting it on Davis, where it was like, okay, what's Davis going to do to turn this around? And yes, he did blast him to hell with that uppercut. 1 punch knocked him out cold. But the way that Povetkin set up the knockout versus Dillian Whyte, after, again, he was behind on the scorecard. He had been dropped multiple times. In fact, I was thinking, should Povetkin's corner allow this to go on another round or two? Because he just wasn't looking his best in there. He was getting jabbed a lot, then getting dropped. It wasn't looking pretty for Povetkin in there. But with 1 punch, the fortunes of both of these guys changed. It was shocking. It was near the beginning of the boxing return from the pandemic. So this was one of the first fights. There was no crowd. It was quiet. So it just took a sinister twist when Povetkin just dropped his shoulder, looked like he was going to the body, comes up with the uppercut. Dillian Whyte was just totally naked up there. He was kind of dropping his guard, to protect his body, because he thought that's where Povetkin was going to go with the punch. Povetkin switched it up, blasted him. Dillian Whyte is sleeping, and it's just quiet, nothing but concern. It's just shocking knockout. That is my knockout of the year. The next one we're going to is performance of the year. So this is different than fight of the year. This is, what do you just have to tip your cap to, look at the person who performed and say, that was unbelievable, unlike any other performance I've seen this entire year. Who wins that? Now, to that, a lot of people would say Teofimo Lopez's win over Lomachenko, which I get it. And like I said, Teofimo Lopez beating him, that was my game-changing event of the year. But the performance of the year goes to Tyson Fury knocking out Deontay Wilder in that rematch. They had fought to a draw before that, where Fury actually deserved the win in most people's minds. I thought he won the vast majority of the rounds. But here we come with the rematch. Fury versus the most feared man in the division, the guy with the 1-punch nuclear bomb, Deontay Wilder. And there was a little chirping, and in my preview, in my pre-fight video, I actually said, What if Tyson Fury comes forward on Wilder? Instead of fighting him the way that he fought Vladimir Klitschko, and in the way that I think he should fight Anthony Joshua because of Joshua's two-handed power, what if, where Fury is like doing a lot of the feints, a lot of the, the eyebrow raising, getting the guy to react, and then throwing a jab, and then moving some more, and just basically out jabbing the guy for 12 rounds and clearly winning the rounds. What if Fury comes forward, smothers Deontay Wilder's right hand, and actually just uses his size, his weight, and puts a beating on Wilder? And that's exactly what he did. In hindsight, it might look like it made perfect sense, but going into that fight, people weren't thinking that that was going to happen. They were thinking generally either Wilder by knockout or Fury by decision. Now, Fury by knockout would have been one thing, but it was the savage way that he went about his business. He still maintained all of the boxing ability that we've associated with Fury, but he also had this extra level of savage where he just bloodied up his face, his eardrum. He was putting him in headlocks, one headlock after another after another. There are other controversies where you could search the web and see the other glove-related controversies that, that some are diving into. But Fury's approach, his menacing approach to fighting Deontay Wilder was just one of those things where you'd have to look at maybe George Foreman's performance in winning the title against then champ Joe Frazier, giving Frazier his first professional loss. George Foreman with performances like that was just looking like a specimen where it's like, why would anybody even want to fight this guy? And that's what Tyson Fury looked like in this rematch versus Deontay Wilder. 270 plus pounds. Plus, he's got footwork where he's doing that little shuffle step where it's like a boom, 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 and then throwing the punch, or boom, boom, and then throwing the punch. The timing on his punches, the way he'll lead you with the left hand into his right hand. If you let your back touch the ropes, Tyson Fury has this sweeping left hand and he'll guide you right into his right hand. It's nasty. And he just led Wilder into so many of those punches. Dropped Wilder twice. One of the times upside the head with this just nasty straight right hand. Tyson Fury was putting his punches together. Like I said, he was using his size to rough Wilder up, and he just looked like a nightmare to deal with in that punch. It's something that, it happened before the pandemic, so you might have to go back and rewatch that fight, but take a look at that and just look at how it was in front of a packed crowd, and here these two juggernauts collide, and then it played out like that to where it just looked inhumane. It looked inhumane at a certain point. So Tyson Fury's performance versus Deontay Wilder is my performance of the year. Now, my fighter of the year basically came down to Tyson Fury, Teofimo Lopez, Errol Spence Jr., Canelo Alvarez. And although Canelo Alvarez is at the top of my pound-for-pound list, the fighter of the year, damn, it's hard to not say Canelo the way that he looked against Callum Smith. And it's hard to deny the great Errol Spence Jr. from coming back from the car accident, picking Danny Garcia as his first return opponent, and then putting on that performance. My goodness. But with this one, I'm going with Tyson Fury. And the reason I'm picking Tyson Fury over Teofimo Lopez specifically is because I watched that Teofimo Lopez versus Lomachenko fight, and as much as a I shook up the world game changer as it was, I don't know who I would pick in the rematch. I feel like after watching this Tyson Fury versus Deontay Wilder rematch, that I know who I would pick in that third fight. And because Tyson Fury looked so devastating, looked so complete, looked so, how the hell are you going to beat this guy when he's fighting that type of a style? This was his first fight under Sugar Hill Stewart. I cannot not pick Tyson Fury as my fighter of the year of 2020, the pandemic year. All respect to Teofimo Lopez, Errol Spence, and Canelo Alvarez. Tyson Fury, people will have recency bias. Tyson Fury just did this in January. So enough time has passed, or was it February? January or February is beginning of the year, pre-pandemic. And Tyson Fury put on that performance, and I think that it happened long enough ago to where a lot of people are forgetting how devastating a night that was for Deontay Wilder. My goodness. Tyson Fury looked awesome. And yeah, I cannot deny him Fighter of the Year. He is the king of the heavyweights. Look, of course, he still needs to handle the business against Anthony Joshua, granted. But I'll put it this way. After seeing the way that Tyson Fury looked against Joshua, regardless of how well Joshua fought against Kubrat Pulev, most people are going to pick Tyson Fury to beat Anthony Joshua because of how devastating he looked against Deontay Wilder. So, those are my best of 2020 shout-outs. I want to wish everybody a happy holiday. I hope you had a Merry Christmas, and I hope you have a Happy New Year. Thanks again for tuning in. Here's to a prosperous and hopefully less affected by COVID, basically a COVID-reduced 2021. Much love to everybody out there. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.